Wow. That was awesome. Yeah, I just saw Dune Part 2, and before I give my thoughts, I should probably say I genuinely have no knowledge of Dune whatsoever. I went into both this and the first movie pretty much completely blind. I've not read the books. I knew very little about the story. All I knew was that it was a big influence on a lot of stuff, probably most notably Star Wars, but still a lot of other things. So yeah, I knew pretty much nothing going in, especially when going into the first one, and my thoughts on the first one were, it was pretty damn good. I thought some parts were a little slow and the characters could have been a little more interesting, but I was willing to give it some slack because it was clear it was just part one. Either way, it was still a really solid movie. I thought the acting was great, the story was interesting, the effects were phenomenal, the soundtrack was amazing, the cinematography was crazy impressive. It was an overall really solid movie. Now, if you take everything I just said about the first movie, you make it at least about, 3-5 times better, and then you apply it to a different movie, that movie is Dune Part 2. This movie was phenomenal. People have been going absolutely nuts for this movie, and I can safely say, as someone who had no prior knowledge of Dune, again, had no attachment to the source material whatsoever, it is 100% deserved. This is a freaking great movie. Now, with this obviously being a part 2, there's going to be some mild spoilers for the first movie, but the first one came out in 2021, so if you haven't seen it by this point, too bad. You're getting spoilers. Anyway, it takes place in a world where, obviously, again, much like Star Wars, there's this galactic empire that rules everything, and it primarily takes place on the planet Arrakis, which is home to this spice, as they call it, which is something that is used to power most things in the galaxy, and is their most valuable resource. And it follows this kid named Paul, who is the son of one of the senators, and in the first movie, the senator was killed by the Emperor because he was seen as a bit of a threat, but Paul and his mother were able to escape, and at the very end, they end up meeting with the planet's natives, and they join them, and Paul decides he's gonna try and use them, or help them, I should say, to stop the Empire and, protect their planet. Because of this, a lot of the natives believe he is the chosen one of this ancient prophecy that will help rise up and save their people from great turmoil, but what I find really interesting about it is that while some of the natives believe he's the chosen one, others don't, and even Paul himself is like, no, I'm not the chosen one, I'm just a person that's here to help you, if anything, I'm here to learn from you, and they're like, no, you are here to save us, we must follow you, and I think that's a really interesting idea. The chosen one is a very overused cliche, but I think this does enough to help it stand out, and I really enjoy that. But while this is going on, his mother, who is also part of this, clan of witches, I guess, or whatever, these women that have special powers, they force her to drink this water of life that will supposedly kill the, this is one thing I will say that is a little complicated. It makes a bit more sense in context, but either way, it gives her these visions, and of course, she winds up believing Paul is the chosen one too. So, yeah, now he's arguing both with some of the natives as well as his own mother, who think he's destined for greatness, but again, he doesn't really think that way. Instead, he more so forms a relationship with this one girl named Chani, I think is her name, who's from a different tribe that, again, doesn't believe he's the chosen one, and they end up forming a relationship with each other, and right off the bat, I'm just gonna say that's one of my things I think could have been done a little better in this movie is the relationship with them. It's fine, it works, but I think it could have been a little stronger. But now let's get into the actual good stuff. Like I said, Ed, pretty much everything that was good in the first movie is here and accounted for. The acting is fantastic. Every single one of these actors brings their A game, which makes sense given how beloved of a source material this is and how influential it was. A lot of people are saying this is basically the modern day equivalent of the Lord of the Rings movies, and I think that's pretty fair. Admittedly, I've never seen Lord of the Rings, but either way, this is a super impressive movie. I mean, the effects are absolutely phenomenal, especially if you know anything about this movie. It's probably the sandworms and stuff, and they look fantastic. The production design of this movie is insane, especially the sets combined with especially the cinematography. This movie feels huge. Just looking at it, I'm so glad I saw this movie in theaters. Just looking at it, you really feel like you are in this world, and I honestly kind of wish I got a chance to see it in IMAX, because I feel like that would have been even more impressive. Sadly, I didn't, but on the regular screen, it still looked incredible. Honestly, I think the most impressive thing about this movie is the sound. And I'm not just talking about the soundtrack, though that is really fantastic, but also just the sound effects themselves and the way they not only help this atmosphere, but also especially during the big action sequences where it is booming. Like, there are so many moments, especially there's a scene where Paul is literally riding on a sandworm. The sound literally, and I mean literally, shook the theater, and it was incredible. It is some of the most impressive stuff I have ever seen in a movie. Well, the first one was very dialogue heavy. This one still has a lot of talking in it, but it also has a lot more action scenes with it, and it's more about explaining how the world works, which again was partially in the first one, but here we go a lot more in depth, and once again, it is fantastic. The world building in this is super cool. I want to know everything about how this planet works. And the action scenes, again, are super impressive, though admittedly there's not that many of them, but the few that we do have, again, like Paul riding the sandworm and stuff, absolutely awesome. I really enjoyed that. But admittedly, I will say there are a couple of things that hold this movie back from being, like, truly spectacular. It's still really good, but I did have a few small issues. One, again, this is kind of a mild spoiler, but at one point we learned that the Baron, who is in charge of overseeing the planet, his nephew was, like, the primary one looking over it, but now he's replacing him with a different one of his nephew, which the issue I have with this plot point isn't really introduced until, like, well over an hour into the movie, and it just hard cuts to this whole sequence of the Baron's nephew, who we find out is literally a psychopath. Like, he is doing all this insane stuff just for the hell of it. Again, I won't go too much in detail, but either way, he's nuts. And literally, this whole sequence goes on for like 15 to 20 minutes, and we don't cut back to like what's going on Arrakis once. The whole time we are just focusing on this guy. And again, it's not bad. I think it could have been implemented a lot better, like if we start on Arrakis and then, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes in, we got our first shot of the Baron and his nephew, then we go back to Arrakis for a bit, then back to the nephew, then back to Arrakis, so on and so forth, until it's time for him to finally be introduced. But because we just spend all our time on Arrakis and then it just hard cuts to the nephew, and again, it doesn't cut back for like a good 15, 20 minutes, it feels like that was just kind of thrown in unnaturally. I don't know, that just felt kind of weird to me. Again, not a huge issue, but it was something that stuck out. And the other issue I had, which I genuinely did not think would be an issue, I think the movie could have actually been a little longer, and I did not think that would be the case, because this is a 2-hour and 40-minute movie, and despite that, I never felt bored. I was engaged throughout the entire thing. Just everything from the story to the characters to the action sequences were great. But that brings me to my next point. The climax in particular, I thought was a little rushed. Like, it makes it look like this big epic battle is gonna happen. You know, they're storming this castle, they're going after the Baron, they're doing all this crazy stuff. It is insane. And then it just kind of stops. Like, the actual climax, or at least this big battle that it felt like they were building up, lasts like 6 minutes. And again, it's really cool. The stuff we see is really impressive, but I was like, oh wait, that's it? Again, the movie doesn't stop right there. There is another sequence after that, but again, I really wish the previous sequence went on longer, because what we did see was awesome. I was like, yeah, let's do this! And it really just left me wanting more, which I guess you could see is both a compliment and an insult, but either way, that's one thing I wish there was more of. But those are my only issues, and in the grand scheme of things, they're pretty small, because this movie was friggin' epic. If you have not seen the first movie, go watch it, and then go watch this, because it is more than worth your time, and it totally lived up to the hype. All of the praise it has garnered is 100% warranted. Dune Part 2 earns a 9 out of 10.